the many bad things about ceasing to enforce your drug laws, which most of the major Western countries have done, is that the police are not arresting people for possession of drugs anymore. So you have no factual way of establishing, because again, when someone is arrested, no one makes any effort anymore to discover whether that person is a drug user. And this is a piece of research I ceaselessly recommend, that whenever someone is arrested for a crime of violence, then his or her drug use should be investigated. And then we might discover if my theory that there is a causal link between the two has any basis. What I can say is that there's one subset of violent crime which is thoroughly studied both by the authorities and the media, and that is rampage killings, which are sometimes done by terrorists. Though, of course, in the United States, they're often done by people who are obviously out of their minds, the school shootings, and no one attempts to give them a political character there. Here, they tend to be given a political character even if they don't have one. And in almost all of those cases, if you look, you will find evidence of serious drug use, usually marijuana, though sometimes steroids and sometimes actually SSRI antidepressants in the life of the person involved. And there's a great reluctance to deal with this. You may remember a school shooting in Uvalde in Texas, I suppose 2 or 3 years ago. And the New York Times initially reported that the perpetrator was, one of his problems was that he was having rows with, I think, his mother and grandmother because they wouldn't let him smoke marijuana at home. And the New York Times ran the story on its online edition, and then it dropped it, and it never appeared in the printed edition. And I thought, this is very odd. I've contacted the New York Times in about 15 different ways, including their London bureau, to try to explain why they dropped the story, and they all talked to me. And because I worked for a national newspaper with resources, I was able to ask a freelance living nearby to go to Uvalde and to check out with the original source of the story whether it was true or not, because I thought maybe they found out that it had been mistakenly reported, and therefore they just had dropped it rather than doing as they should have done. So we've dropped this because it's not true. Anyway, our freelance went to Uvalde, found the original source, and she confirmed absolutely that this was the case, that the person was a marijuana user. So why was that dropped from the New York Times? I'll never know, because they won't talk to me. But I think there is, in a large part of our politics and our media, a very, very strong fear of raising any problem around marijuana, because there is an enormously powerful lobby, both a commercial lobby and, as it were, a semi-political lobby, people who don't want to have the laws against that drug enforced. So many people high in our politics and law and everywhere else smoke marijuana as students and as young people. So many of them allow their children to do it, and therefore they are embarrassed or anxious or indeed simply against taking any action against it now. And as the longer this goes on, the more widespread the problem becomes. Once it was established that cigarette smoking led to lung cancer, things began to happen about the sale. It took a long time because there were very highly established lobbies to keep cigarettes on sale, but nonetheless there was a drive to do something about it. And I think we need something similar with marijuana. Look, if people do a survey and find out there's absolutely no correlation at all between marijuana smoking and mental illness and mental illness and following marijuana use and severe violence, then I'll have to retreat and say I was wrong. But I don't see any sign of anybody doing this. And as I say, in the subset of examined crimes, from the Bataclan killings and the Charlie Hebdo killings to killings in Canada and Japan and all over the world, you will find this correlation. And correlation is not necessarily causation, but it jolly well sometimes is. And I think it's also been the case that in most of the Western countries, the same thing happened towards the end of the 60s when supposedly powerful and effective psychiatric drugs became available. The mental hospitals were closed in large numbers, and people who were mentally ill were pretty much pushed out on the street, and it was called care in the community. And there are dozens, I think, of homicides in this country every year which are connected with people who are actually mentally ill. And it's not people take drugs because they enjoy it, and it's only later that they discover that there's a payment for pleasure. And you've read Brave New World, and the whole of that society is kept going by soma, the pleasure drug. And what Huxley says, I think one of his prefaces to Brave New World, is that is that soma was developed in his mythical world by huge numbers of biochemists getting together and creating a drug which was both capable of creating euphoria and also did no harm. But I don't think any such drug ever has existed or ever will exist. If you want to get the reward of pleasure without the effort, then you will have to in some way disrupt your physiology and the physiology particularly of your brain in ways which are quite likely to do damage. And I don't think there is any such drug or ever will be. But there's pleasure that gets people to take drugs.